Always great to see you. I saw you last down at Daytona, Ponce Inlet.
Yeah, racing North Turn.
Yeah, racing's North Turn.
It's a good deal.
That's a lot of history. You just walk into that area, and I feel like I would say stepping back in time, but of course it's a little bit modernized compared to what it was back then, I'm sure.
Well, with me, David, it brings back memories.
Mm-hmm.
And I can still visualize and see the guys and the cars and the people and make chill bumps run up and down my arms, and I just, I love that period of time. And I know you've heard this 1,000 times. That was when racing was racing. Mm-hmm. But things change. We move on. They made 38,039 Fords. And my daddy probably tore up 2 dozen of them. And no telling how many the rest of them were torn up. We run generally 4 or 5 times a week back in those days. And I remember Bill France would run, when he formed NASCAR in 48, started running 2 nights on different locations. Might be some in Georgia, might be some in the Carolinas. They were just tearing the cars up. And France he and his wife, they used to come by our place, was an old farm, 800-acre dairy farm, Blair Farm, and called Clover Hill Farms. But they'd sit around the big oak tree and talk. And boys, what we're going to do. And it's getting hard to find a 39 Ford. Everybody wanted a 39 Ford because Raymond Parks, that's what he bought for Red Byron, Fonny Flock, Roy Hall, and Lloyd C. So it might be monkey see, monkey do. But the 39s also made good liquor cars. The first ones to have hydraulic brakes on you. And see, 38s didn't have it, and prior 38s didn't have hydraulic and mechanical. Mm-hmm. You push for a week and you still run over something,
Did they have a big trunk?
Sort of, but you see the little coupes, you take all the back out of them and it just opened up into a pretty good sized space. You get 125 gallons on pretty easy. But anyway, they was tearing some of those cars up. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I know there's a guy named Billy Davis who used to keep his eye out all the time looking for 39 Fords for my daddy. I think that led to the strictly stock stuff. Bill France did, as I understand, he told my daddy, and they sat around the big oak over there and talked about this, and that he'd asked Ford Motor Company to consider remaking 39 Fords so they have something to race with. And Ford reluctantly told him to appreciate it, but we just wouldn't look good on our behalf to do that. We're in a business to make new cars, but we appreciate you asking. Huh. So that never materialized, so hence strictly stock. And they ran a test on that deal down in Florida, probably Jacksonville or somewhere in that area, I believe it was, for a few laps. They had a modified race schedule, but they figured they'd just get a few of the newer cars out there and let them run a few laps, see what people thought about it. And so the crowd liked it. Next thing you know, he'd scheduled a strictly stock race in Charlotte, that new Charlotte Speedway built by 2 moonshiners from Kernersville, North Carolina. And they got caught with their liquor, and so they lost their lease on that land to the property owner, and then he, contacted Bill France and promoted races there. See, Moonshine started a lot of this stuff back in the day, and it was a big part of racing was moonshining too. Well, anyway, in the Charlotte Observer, some years ago, I was over there and looking in the library, looking at the papers, and it says that Bill France had run an experiment. And most of the paper was devoted for what Bruton Smith was going to do at Concords, and it was an experiment. And a little bit about that deal is I remember seeing 49, I'd have been 11 years old. I remember a little of it, but see, France, when he come to promote it, Greensboro Fairgrounds and Peace Haven and the Fairgrounds in Winston, he'd come stay with us some and finally got a place on Lee Street in Greensboro. And they moved up there finally, and of course still had the place in Daytona Beach. But see, France moved on up from Florida, started promoting on up what I'd call 95 and Interstate 85. Yeah. On up to Richmond finally. And he was co-promoting that some with Sam Nunes. Sam was with AAA. Well, my daddy built the track in 47, but my daddy sanctioned with him. But the race at the fairgrounds over there, getting back to that, they sat around the tree and talked about it, what they're going to do. So he scheduled that race over there June the 19th, I believe it was, in 1949. Telephone rang one day during the week there, and it was Annie France, and she talked to my daddy, and I heard him talking to her, and a little bit, apparently Bill France got on the phone. But what the conversation was about, she called him and said, "Are you coming to Charlotte this weekend?" My dad said, "Well, I don't have I'm going to be there." I said, "Hey, High Point's going to be there, but I don't have anything to drive. I still got my modified." And she said, well, that's what he wants to talk to you about. And you say that the going to be a big crowd? He said, yeah. Now, the reason he knew there's going to be a big crowd, High Point was about 5,000 people at that time, 5, 6, something like that. And he had a liquor business, and he sold half High Point liquor, moonshine.
Yeah.
And so he knew about it. And plus the farm. I mean, we delivered milk all over town. And the Blair boys, you know, there was 7 of them, and they were everywhere. And they was in the land business and farming and everything else.
Yeah.
So she said, well, the good said, Bill, meaning Big Bill, he's just worried to death. There's nobody going to be there, not going to have enough cars. Of course, people still calling and coming in about it. So how about tell him what you just told me? So she put him on the phone, and Big Bill asked my daddy again, said, are you going to be in Charlotte? And he said, yeah, I'm going to be there. Well, you don't have anything to drive, do you? He said, no. And he said, well, that's one reason I call you. There's 2 guys here from Great Bend, Kansas. They own a Lincoln Mercury dealer, and they brought 2 Lincolns. They brought their own driver with them, and they asked me about getting somebody to drive the other car. And I thought about you. And Bill said, well, yeah, I'd like to drive it. And he said, well, they taken them out on Wilson Boulevard, and they gave them Jim Roper. That was their driver, the fastest car, and you could drive the other one. My daddy never qualified that car, so he started toward the rear. And I don't know, it had 18, 19, 20 cars, something like that. And Bob Flock led the first 5 laps of that race. The next 145 was led by Bill Blair and the other Lincoln. He done call them and passed everybody. In the meantime, it was a hot day, and a lot of cars were running hot, coming in pits, pouring water around them, and going back out. And the track started out being dirt, and they had it well watered down, you know, with calcium chloride, and as they put on.
Well, let me ask you a question right quick.
Sure.
Before you get back to that. Was that the speedway that was on Little Rock Road and Wilkinson Boulevard, the corner there in Charlotte? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in that area. You know, I lived out beside off of Morris Chapel Road, and I worked on Little Rock Road, and then I moved out beside the airport right near Holman and Moody for, I don't know, 1980 or something. Right. So I always passed by there, and I heard that there was a speedway there at some point. And there was like a Allison's Trucking or something.
Right. Exactly. It was 3/4 mile dirt. For that period of time, it was a fairly decent track. All of them were dirt, maybe seat anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000. I think Hillsborough was seat about 5 or 6. The High Point Speedway I know was seat 10, but they were all similar. Except the High Point Speedway had a tunnel under it to get in and out of it, and this tunnel for the pedestrians to get out of the grandstand back into the infield. But get back to that Charlotte race, there's not a lot of people know what happened over there that day, and in fact, there's not a lot of people left living that witnessed that race. And there was very little written about it. The main deal that happened was that my daddy fell out, then he made a pit stop, and according to the paper and others that were living at that point in time, he done lapped the field at least twice with that Lincoln. The guy told him, and they said, how do you want me to drive this car? It's brand new. The guy told him, said, drive the hell out of it. So that's what my daddy did. And I know there's an article in Benny Phillips wrote it with Jim Pascal, who had driven his daddy's car over there that day, and driven his daddy's car. It was a 47 Ford, I believe it was, coupe. Lee Petty was there with somebody else's Buick, and he turned it upside down. And when it stopped, it landed upside down. I think the wheels were still turned on it. But anyway, he was there. They tore a few cars. But it was Aaron pit stop that put the Lincoln that my daddy drove out of the race. He come in to get gas, and they had a gas can there, and they didn't have phones or nothing that period of time. They just took the lid off the tank and turned it upside down, you know. Then the guy went around and put a coat of oil in it, and the hoods, half split hoods, you open one side up, you take the oil cap off, put a coat of oil in it. And some bystander wanted to help. He reached over, he took his shirt off, T-shirt, and took the radiator cap off and picked up a water bucket. And of course, when he took that radiator cap up, the water rushed out of it, and then they poured cool water back in, and it broke the thermostat housing. Yeah. On it, and that put him out of the race. And you're talking about a fight. After that, my daddy got a hold of that guy, and my mother said he tried to kill him. Oh, yeah. You know? But anyway, that's sort of a deal what happened. And then when Hubert Westmoreland, he was originally from Kernersville, he moved to Burlington, and he was a moonshine guy himself. And he fixed a lot of moonshine cars. And Hubert was an easygoing guy and didn't say too much, very low-key, real quiet voice, but he knew what he was doing. And he entered that car, which was a liquor car, meaning that it had a helper spring on the rear of it. See, in that period of time, they run the liquor cars too. I got pictures of my daddy's liquor car, and they sat sort of like this with no load on them, then they sat down. And then the helper spring had 2 clamps on one on each end, and it would catch them, and that supported the load. Hubert had that car entering the race. He happened to see Glenn Dunaway walk by, and Hubert just getting out from under the car. And he asked Glenn, said, "Glenn, said, you driving anything?" Glenn said, "No, I'm just over here to watch the race." Like many of the others, all they had was their modifieds that they drove. Hubert said, "How about driving this car?" And Glenn said, "Okay." So when my daddy fell out with Glenn, he took over the lead of that race. And then he won it. And the other Lincoln finished second, and it was running hot at the end of that race. So he wasn't running about 40, 50 mile an hour when he finished the race. Mm-hmm. That was with Jim Roper. Mm-hmm. And they're all from Great Bend, Kansas. After the race is over, I sort of believe, now this is my opinion, that France really wanted one of them Lincolns to win. Mm. The guy that in the newspapers that did Dick Tracy, he's the one that made a mention about it in the newspaper, and that's how those two guys from Kansas found out about that race back here. Yeah. The driver of the Lincoln, they brought Roper here with them, and he got the fastest one. The other one, my daddy drove, and it was number 44. Roper, he was, I won't say a braggart, but he was proud of himself, thought a lot of himself. And a lot of the guys down here just didn't warm up to him. Yeah. And then one of the other guys that had the Lincoln there was Millard Clothier and Ben McIntyre. I think McIntyre owned the dealership and Clothier was the money man. And, I mean, they let everybody know that they were well off. People didn't warm up to them, so it didn't last but just a few races here. They run Daytona Beach. My daddy drove the Lincoln again there and led it. And getting back to the race over here, the most interesting thing about that race, they disqualified Hubert's car because of the helper springs. Somebody noticed them. Now, they were inspected, pre-race inspection, and nobody said a thing about it. Post-race is when the complaint started about that. Yeah. So France disqualified him, said it's supposed to be strictly stock. So Hubert got a lawyer and took him to court, and it's tried in Greensboro. They presented their case, in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the judge made the decision that, you can read here, it says strictly stock in entry blank. And see, the rules back then were generally on the entry blank, maybe a paragraph. They didn't have rule books. Okay. Eventually they did, and they add to them a little bit. But France made his rules as he went many times. And I think on the last page of that rule book, it said that they reserved to be the last word. In other words, he could change the rule any time he wanted to, and he did so. Yeah. The judge ruled in France's favor, and the drivers had at that Sunday, June the 19th, that they made up a pot and gave the money winnings to Glenn Dunaway. Mm. They felt strongly about that he drove all day and didn't win the race and got disqualified, so they passed a hat and gave him some money. Mm-hmm. And then went to court, and France won. Now, the end of that deal was, when they give it to Jim Roper, I don't know if maybe he run one more race. I don't remember him lasting maybe 1 or 2 races, and that was it. Mm. And same thing about the 2 guys that brought the Lincolns here. But later on, if you remember, I don't guess you would remember this, but they had the race at Darlington 1950s, first super speedway track built down here. Mm. Yeah, it was about 21 years before. Of course, you wouldn't remember. Me. But the guy that won that race was Johnny Mance. And guess whose car it was? Hubert Westmoreland. And the car belonged to, guess who? Bill France, Alvin Hawkins. And I always felt like, my dad did too, that to make up to Hubert for what happened, that France got him to prepare that Plymouth. Yeah. That's the way I feel about it. His next race he had was at Daytona Beach. He had about 4,000 people. Now, over at the Charlotte, they call it New Charlotte Speedway, but it's anything but new. Dirt, rough as a cob. They had, depending on where you got your information from, but in the newspaper it says something like 12,000 people or so. That was probably a tax deal there. But it's really closer to what I understand, about 18,000, 19,000 people. France, over at Charlotte, he was worried to death not going to have a crowd. Didn't know how this deal was going to work, strictly stock racing, how it's going to work. And they called it strictly stock. That's what everybody else called it too. Russ Catlin, Quincyberry, and different ones. And when they patrol come up over there and told him, said, you're going to have to close the gates and start this race because it's blocking the highways people can't get to and from. So when you come into that track, you come across the back straightaway. Okay. Unless you went around and going to sit in the grandstand, then you went on around and parked over in the field. But to get in the infield, you had to come across the track into the infield. Mm-hmm. And they just swarms of them coming. That was their first race, second race at Daytona. They had reported 4,000 people there. But remember, he finally had to put signs up down there, rattlesnakes. Because, see, people's coming by boats into the inland harbor there and coming across and getting them sand dunes and come across into the track. And nobody could stop it. No crowd control.
Yeah.
Because when I went down there, I stood along the edge of that highway, the back stretch. My daddy told me, he said, you stay right over here. Don't you go anywhere else. So I went with everybody else after they left from a standstill going up the beach, to watch them come down the back stretch. And I stand right on the edge, and they come over a knoll so fast I didn't have time to stand back. It blowed me off my feet, and I landed on my butt in the sand at the sand dunes. And so I didn't do that again. But anyway, that was the second race. Third race, Okanichi. And he put everything he could into it to advertise for that race. That was going to be the make or break race. And he ended up having a good crowd of 19,000 people. He told my daddy, he said, sell that modified. This is the future. This is the future of what we're going to do. He run 8 races, and I think they had 90-some thousand people all total that they reported. And that'd been over 12,000 per race. And now we got, it changed to Grand National. Now we got Cup race, and that's where she started right there.
Hi, folks. This is Bill Blair. I guess you know where I'm going. Mount Airy, North Carolina, September the 10th. Moonshine Racers Reunion, 3rd annual. The autograph session will start at 10 a.m. that morning, and once you get your driver's autograph, be sure to go over to the silent auction tables and look at the items on sale and make a bid on them. It goes for a good cause. And then also the event t-shirts, they'll be there in that same corner, and they're beautiful shirts. I've seen them, and I'll be wearing one. And just walk up down the street and look at all the race cars. Last year we had 85. I think we'll have a lot more this year. If you've got old race cars you want to bring yours, bring them on up. Get there about 8 o'clock that morning. The event starts promptly at 10 a.m. And just sit back and enjoy yourself. Talk to everybody up there. They want to talk about racing, naturally, and early day moonshine. That's how racing started, the moonshiners and the racers. Also, folks, another thing that of interest would be the moonshiners. They'll be there. There'll be some from Kentucky, but mainly here in North Carolina. They'll have a still set up and running to show you how the shine was made. Well, the police wouldn't really let us make liquor, so we're going to run some hot water. We'll show you how it was made. Right after lunch, about 1 p.m., we're going to start with the Wall of Fame induction, honoring our early day stock car racers and people who made a contribution to stock car racing. Then later on that day, at about probably 3, we'll be headed out to the track with a parade to visit the old racetrack. And then when we get back, then about 5 p.m., the Sons of the Bootleg will be there to entertain you at the big tent until 8 o'clock. Remember, folks, with all that's going on up there in Mount Airy September 10th, it's all free to the public. If you've been to Mount Airy, you know what a great place that is. It's a friendly town, friendly atmosphere, a lot of places to eat. So if you've never been there, come and check us out. For more information, go to www.visitmayberry.com.